Hello and welcome to Zip Tie. This is my 1970-ish Porsche 914, like under all this crap, and I have been building it from the ground up to be a friggin' awesome time attack race car. Last episode we put the body on it, which made it actually look like a real car, and this episode I completely ruined it by filling it with dust. That is because I am building my own carbon fiber parts. I'm doing a wet layup, and I will show you from step one to finished product how to build your own. So if you want to build your own parts, let's get into it. At the end of the last episode, I introduced my set of side scoops, which received a mixed reception. The plan has changed slightly. The air-to-water intercooler will still use the scoop, but now I'm going to make it myself out of carbon. So to begin making the mold, I'm taking some measurements and then I'm going to cut up my near $400 scoop. To make the rest of the mold, I'm using 2-inch XPS foam. This is normally used to insulate a house, but now I'm using it on a car I built instead of buying a house. This stuff is super dense, unlike styrofoam, so it's a perfect mold making material. Cutting the foam is extremely easy, just not with this hacksaw. For most of it, I used a Sawzall, or I just took the blade off the hacksaw and used it on its own. With a bunch of pieces cut out to build enough thickness, I used 3M77 spray adhesive to attach all the foam together. It's now time to shape the foam into a scoop. The Sawzall, the hacksaw blade, and some 80 grit sandpaper make quick work of the foam. During this process, I found that a Sawzall clamped in the vise works great, just kind of like a makeshift bandsaw. After some more hugging, the mold is perfectly shaped to accept the carbon scoop I cut earlier. And since I'm going to build one piece out of carbon, I might as well build two. And the other one is for the oil cooler. I decided not to use the scoop on the side, and rather decided that I'd feed the oil cooler with a Nakaduct. Oh yeah, I also remembered that I owned a bandsaw, and that works much better than the Sawzall and the vise. This mold needs a 4-inch inlet for the air duct, so I found a random piece of plastic 4 inches in diameter to sacrifice for the mold. Now this is a very good looking mold, except for I put the inlet on the wrong side, so I had to make a second one, and I got it correct this time. I added an extra section of foam to both molds for mounting flanges and a place for the cloth to hang over later when the carbon is laid up. With the foam in its final shape, I covered both of them in a layer of epoxy resin. For this, I'm using West Systems 105 and 206 resin and hardener. I've been very impressed with West Systems because they offer pumps that precisely dispense the liquid 1 pump of hardener for each pump of resin. You can also weigh each to achieve the right ratio if you don't want to spring for the pumps, but the pumps certainly make it way easier. A trick I learned a while ago is if you super glue the base of the brushes, it helps prevent any loose bristles from falling out in your piece. Also, it's worth noting if you're making molds out of XPS like this, polyester resin, which is cheaper, can melt the foam, so be careful. You don't want to mess up the things you've just spent hours making. After letting it cure overnight, I used 80 grit sandpaper to smooth out the epoxy and prep it for paint. There were still some low spots in the molds, so I used Bondo to fill it up. Bondo is fairly easy to mix up and apply. It says to make a 1/2 inch tall circle and run a bead of hardener across it. Honestly, I like a pea of hardener for a golf ball of Bondo. That makes it like way slower to harden up and you actually get to work it a little bit. Though it gets a bad name, Bondo cures in less than 30 minutes, so its utility is honestly unmatched. Bondo is great at blending, so I used it to blend between the foam and the plastic for my air inlet. I also used it to blend between the foam and my fancy carbon fiber scoop that is now completely ruined. With the Bondo smooth, I hit it with a tack cloth and gave it a coat of paint. I don't think painting it is totally necessary, and I probably wouldn't do it again. And that's because where I got too aggressive with the DA sander, the acetone and the spray paint melted the foam, so I had to do this whole process all over again. Okay, so now the molds are made, they need to be prepped for carbon, because carbon is only cool when it's not permanently attached to greenhouse foam. So it's getting a release agent and Pardal paste, aka wax, and also PVA release film. The paste gets applied and buffed off 3 to 5 times, and the paste does the majority of the heavy lifting, but I also chose to use PVA release film, which you normally spray on, but I just brushed it. I did a pretty heavy coat and let it dry overnight, but it really should only take about 30 minutes to dry. Next, remembering I haven't done this before, I wanted to get a good idea of the shape I wanted to cut out of carbon. I tried using t-shirts. I didn't utilize this method very well or at all, and this could be useful in certain situations, but I honestly just kind of winged it. I measured all my pieces and I cut them into rectangles and just gave it a try. And that brings us to the star of the show, the carbon cloth. This is a 3K 2x2 twill from fiberglass. 3K is the density of the cloth. 3K is basically a good all-around density to use for any part you want to make, while the 2x2 twill is the design of the cloth. There's 1,000 different designs which all have their own uses and looks. I could probably go on about it all day, but twill and plain weave are basically good enough. When rolling out the cloth, the first thing that needs to be done is straightening out the weave and correcting irregular spots. Time spent here directly influences the final result. I attempted to mark the cloth with a silver Sharpie, but it didn't work because I don't like them and they hate me. So I went with my backup plan, which is using painter's tape. It's much more wasteful, but it certainly gets the job done. I found cutting the cloth pretty easy because I bought a brand new set of shears from Lowe's that are pretty sharp. They do make like these pizza cutter things that I really wish I had, but the shears work just fine. In order to make the part stronger, one of my layers will need to be rotated 45 degrees from the other. This helps make the carbon less flexible in a way that it's hard for me to explain, but it also makes it really wasteful to cut out of carbon roll. Now it's time to mix up some resin, and I also need to consider how I'm going to be laying up the carbon. If I'm using a vacuum bag setup, I want to target about a 50% carbon to 50% resin ratio by weight, but since I'm not using a vacuum bag, it'll end up being about 60 to 70% resin instead. These parts will end up perfectly strong without a vacuum bag, but they will end up a bit heavier. There's a couple other issues, like there will be air bubbles in the resin and the carbon or peel ply can kind of tend to pull away from the mold a little bit more. A light layer of resin is applied to the mold first before the carbon. Then I'll put on my first layer of carbon and I start with the 45 degree turn cloth first because it's more likely to fray. carbon bends a ton easier around corners than I would have thought, but starting with a piece of cloth bigger than you need is just super useful, and you can always cut it down later. Each piece is wetted with resin, and it's important to really try to work the resin into the cloth. Once the bottom layers are done, really think about the order in which you place the top layer down. You want to reduce the chance of it fraying, and you want to increase the chance of getting a good result. The corners can be pretty challenging, but adding a relief cut helps them sit down more nicely. At this point, the camera died, so I'll cover the final layer peel ply on the next part. Okay, so this thing is cured for about 20 hours now. Now comes the part that's a little bit harder, which is I'm going to take this out of the mold. First thing that happens is I got to take the peel ply off. After that, I got to get this tube out, and then I think the whole thing can go straight down if I can pop the sides. So let's get this taken apart. Okay, so that's the peel ply off. So now, obviously this looks like that is for two reasons. Number one, I'm not good at this. Second of all, it's the idea of the peel ply is to leave a nice matte finish so you can have something to sand. So it's gonna probably take a load of sanding. Having more right now to me is more important than having too little, because too little is harder to fix. The goal I had in mind was to save the mold, so I began with cutting the extra carbon off with the shears. I tried to pop out the foam, but after no success, I just basically decided to melt it out with acetone, which completely destroyed the foam, but made my life easy. Okay, so despite what this looks like, this is actually a really good start. So this is just the outside, so this needs to be sanded down. So here's where you get information you would never get in any other YouTube video, because I am not good at this. But we can learn together. So anywhere the release film doesn't touch, obviously it leaves these little spots here. But that's easily solved. I'm just gonna add a little bit of epoxy when I'm running the next piece. Just a little bit, fill the gap, and then I can put some release film back on top of it to match the same finish as the rest of the part, and it'll be done. But overall, I mean, this is a totally usable part, and I think especially once I sand it down, which once I'm done with part 2, I think I can accomplish, and then clear coat this, and it will look great. And building on my knowledge from the first part, I used 3M 71 adhesive spray to keep the cloth from fraying. This stuff is designed to be used in composites, but just go light. It can also help stick carbon into corners on dry layups. Spraying it across the whole cloth before you cut it is absolutely the best time to spray it though. Also of note, I ran out of painter's tape, so I used electrical tape, which kind of sucks because if you stretch it, it will pull the cloth into a wad. Once the resin is mixed up, you have about an hour of working time on the part to get the job done. However, you only have about 20-ish minutes of working time in the cup, so you might only want to do about half of your resin in the cup at once. That way, the resin in the cup doesn't harden on you halfway through. Around the inlet, it was a lot easier to break the carbon into a bunch of pieces, that way it lays down easier. The biggest thing I learned on the first piece is between the first and second layer, a strip of carbon laid over the corner helps to prevent the carbon from sticking up, just like I'm doing here. On the final layer, the biggest things to focus on is aligning the cloth as best you can, reducing all that fraying, and keeping the loose strands and junk out of the epoxy. Always check your cloth before you set it down. It is essential. The final part of the layup is the peel ply. Peel ply is basically a temporary layer added so there's an extra layer of epoxy so you can sand it down smooth. Now that the camera is alive, you can see it's applied the same way as a layer of carbon. You can add a bit of epoxy to the top if it looks dry, but really try your best to avoid bubbles. This is where a vacuum bag definitely is the best way to prevent that.
That's good enough. I'm not touching it anymore.
I don't genuinely understand how the peel ply doesn't get stuck in the epoxy, but it doesn't, and I'm very thankful for that. After getting it out of the peel ply, the results honestly impressed me. But I'm not even going to pretend that the mold will pop out on this one, so you can actually see the foam getting dissolved by the acetone this time. Poking holes in the foam really seems to help get the acetone deeper into the mold and quicken the process. And believe it or not, once all the foam was melted away, the scoop actually popped out of the carbon. Now I get the joy of sanding these parts down so I can apply resin to the voids left by the peel ply, and also fill a bunch of the little air bubbles that would have also been sucked out if I used a vacuum bag. It's super important to avoid sanding into the carbon as it kind of makes the weave look funky when it's all done, but also you want the epoxy to be sanded as evenly as possible so it doesn't look cloudy. I went a little overboard filling air bubbles and voids. I'd say here, less is more. Once the new resin is sanded smooth, I stepped up the sandpaper from 80 to 150 grit, then 220, and finally 400. At this point, it's sanded enough to paint. It took a ton of work to get here, but it's finally time to get these things cleaned up and head off to the paint booth.
As also you can see, I'm in this garage now. We're painting on the Dodge because this has considerably less dust than the other garage. The other garage is a complete disaster currently. I'm trying to limit the amount of orange peel in these. There's still going to be some little dust nibs here and there because this isn't perfect. This isn't a sterile environment. So these guys have been rinsed off with water, and then I dried them off with towels and also went over them with a little bit of alcohol. They're still going to need a little bit more. I'm going to go over them with a little bit of like a prep stuff. What is it? High-tech 7800. You just put a little bit of it on a rag, then you wipe it onto the part. Hopefully it collects all the dust, and ideally you'd have lint-free towels. These are not them, so this is the clear coat I'm using. It's just Rust-Oleum clear, gloss clear. I like the gloss to look a lot better than flat. This is probably just good enough. It honestly will be fine in almost every case. Let's get to spraying this because I'm very excited to see these things when they're all done. I'm going to do maybe 2 or 3 coats, just something to start with a light one. That way I reduce the chances of runs, and then let it go.
The benefit of a clear coat over a strictly resin finish is the clear coat will give the resin UV protection, and that will help keep the epoxy from yellowing like an eBay ricer hood. Clear coat will also need to be cut and buffed after it's done curing, but that's a problem for another episode.
Okay, I am freaking proud of how these turned out. I mean, these things are super stupid nice. Like, I've shown them to people and they can't believe I made them. They aren't perfect though, but they are really good. They weigh about 1 pound each. Like, they're stupid light. They're even lighter than the original scoop was before I cut it apart. Things I would change. First of all, I sanded through the epoxy in a couple spots, and you really can't tell if you don't look for it. The edges aren't the best. That's something that probably comes with time, especially trying to getting rid of fraying and all that. I would vacuum bag parts in the future, given the opportunity. You can kind of see there's a few voids left in this that you really can't sand out, and I didn't want to fill with epoxy anymore because I was getting really tired of making these. I put probably 15-20 hours in just this piece alone. Now, I could have started with a much easier part to produce instead of this completely organic shape, but I didn't, and I'm happy I didn't because I learned a lot. Overall, I think they're freaking perfect for what I want to do. This is something that I think anyone can actually accomplish and get a good result with at home. Like, it doesn't need to be scary. It isn't that bad. Honestly, it was a ton of fun learning this process. Next episode, I actually plan to get a lot done on this car. I gotta make the scoops for the front radiator, actually. I gotta start boogieing down. I'm gonna bond the hood to the fenders. I'm gonna finish the front splitter, like actually finish, and a little bit more. So if you don't wanna miss it, like, subscribe, comment, whatever it takes to get you to come back. And I really appreciate you watching. And I hope you have a good one. See you next time.